Hello and welcome to another episode of Back to Britpop. It's me, Chris. I'm back. As I mentioned on the last episode, it is getting a little bit more difficult and tricky to book guests for the podcast. If you have any ideas for who you would like me to try and reach out to via social media or whatever other method I can find, please let me know. Just search for Back to Britpop on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. Send me a message and I'll do my best to hunt and track those people down for you. In the meantime, though, I've got a cracker today. I had a lovely conversation with Wojtek Godzisz of Symposium. Wojtek was very generous with his time and we have a lovely rambling conversation about all sorts of things. As per usual, I'll be back at the end of the interview to talk about all those ways that you can support this podcast. But in the meantime, here's Wojtek. Welcome to the podcast, Wojtek Godzisz. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure entirely. I think. I was going to say I hope, but that would be ridiculous.
Well, we haven't started yet. You don't know.
I hope it's your pleasure too.
Whereabouts in the world are you?
I'm in St. Leonard's, in the basement of my home, which I share with my wife and children and cat. And the basement is my music area, where I have my upright piano and my guitars and my unwieldy CD collection and music books collection and smattering of vinyl and maybe 30 odd A4 pads of my music manuscript and jottings and the crates of demos and all kinds of interesting things, and even some Symposium master tapes and amps that have been on stage at Glastonbury with me through the years, and all manner of things which mean a lot to me, including, as I'm looking around, signed Tori Amos photo and signed Kate Bush poster and all manner of things from music related. It's my music cave, basically.
I would say this is the ultimate man cave, isn't it? This is the sort of thing I aspire to.
Well, I'm spoiled, and at the risk of making your listeners despise me, I've actually got a proper man cave on the other end of my house, which is in the attic. So the top, that's got all my old DVDs, like thousands of them, and a big screen in it, and it's also got a piano in it. And it's just a place where I can look out over the sea and just relax. But I also want that to be for my girls to grow up and be able to go up there. It's really like a teenage sort of. I feel like a teenager up there. While down here, I feel like an old man connecting to the earth.
Let's take you back a bit, if you don't mind, Wojtek.
I love it.
What started it all to you? What was your musical kind of upbringing and influences?
Well, I think when I was about 10, I got given cassette tapes of Enya's Watermark and Madonna's True Blue albums. And then there was also a Bruce Willis tape I had. You know, Bruce Willis did 2 albums.
Yes.
I don't know if you know that. But,
yeah, I know. I knew he was a singer. I didn't know how many albums a singer, inverted commas.
Yeah. So, but one of them I loved. The first one I had around that time, and it was called The Return of Bruno, which is a ridiculous name. And I think he had a hit single off it, Under the Boardwalk. He covered Under the Boardwalk,
yes,
that classic standard. And I actually loved it. And it meant quite a lot to me at that time. And a friend of mine, Kim, who's recently moved down to St. Leonard's, she's also a huge fan. She couldn't believe it, and we sort of bonded over our love of Bruce Willis's musical output. And she's actually an interviewer, and she managed to interview Bruce Willis once, and she mentioned this to him, and he thought she was taking the piss out of him, and really just didn't ever believe that she was sincere. He thought it was just a bad joke. She was like, okay, let's just move on. And she was like, no, seriously, yeah, it's actually really good. And he just thought she was being sarcastic, I think.
But he takes himself far too seriously, that guy, anyway.
You think so?
Yes.
I don't know how you can. I was a big fan of Moonlighting when I was in that era. I used to watch it in bed with my mum, and I was about 12 years old. Anyway, I mean, we're not here to talk about Bruce Willis. So the question was, musical influences. So yeah, there was that Madonna and that Enya tape, for better or worse. And I loved all of that. And I was a huge Madonna fan and then a huge Prince fan as well around the same era, which was getting slightly more credible. But then, and I don't know whether this is more or less credible, but the guitar music I discovered, maybe fairly boringly, began with Iron Maiden. This was 1988, so it was when their Seventh Son of a Seventh Son album came out, which was their seventh album, and just by coincidence, and Nirvana, Bleach, and Nevermind I had a 45-minute blank tape, and on either side, the first side was Bleach, second side was Nevermind, and I'd listen to that in my Walkman on the bus to and from school religiously. And then Appetite for Destruction as well, and Def Leppard. And these were all on cassettes too. And it's funny now because like Def Leppard and Guns N' Roses are just these kind of cliched karaoke rock of ages type bands that people sort of mock, but also genuinely love, I suppose. But to me, I've sort of lost perspective on them, to tell you the truth. But they're definitely in my DNA now, like they are probably for a lot of people of our generation. Those two albums, Appetite for Destruction and Hysteria, are just sort of in there for better or worse. But I think the Nirvana thing made me want to be more sort of honest and less preening. And around the same time, me and my friends really got into Red Hot Chili Peppers and EMF. Strange combo, but loved them as well, and that meant a lot to me. But I think that those were the main ones at that time for me. And then going into Symposium, is all the skate punk stuff started coming out: Rancid, Offspring, Green Day, NoFX, Bad Religion, and those were really the Pennywise, Lagwagon. All those bands were really present for me.
And so in terms of like picking up an instrument and starting to play something and writing and things like that, I mean, is there a moment you can remember sort of writing down stuff? The
very first thing I learned to play on the guitar was I got one of those guitar tablature books of Jimi Hendrix. And the guy who got me into guitars was a guy called Brendan Hartley, who was a guitar technician at, he ended up being a guitar tech in Denmark Street for a few years, which in Denmark Street, for the people that don't know, is this famous street in London where it has just guitar shops on it and some piano shops, but basically it's got a really rich musical heritage. People used to write songs there. They had songwriting factories on Denmark Street, and then I think now it's still, despite that area being massively overdeveloped and the Astoria venue opposite being knocked down, I think Denmark Street still has guitar shops, the old historical guitar shops on it. And anyway, Brendan got me into guitars, and I think he was the one who told me I should listen to Guns N' Roses. And even though I think he was a Megadeth and Metallica guy, and I remember buying an Iron Maiden t-shirt with him when we were on a school trip to Greece. Anyway, the point of saying that, so the first, I got one of these guitar tablature books, and it was Jimi Hendrix, and I slavishly learnt the intro to Purple Haze and how to play Purple Haze, and that was the first thing, and it's probably the last thing that fires through my synapses when I leave this world as well.
Could be worse.
How to play that? Yeah, it could be worse. And then I got the guitar tablature for Iron Maiden and sort of learned that very nerdily as well. But then it was really Nirvana, and for that you don't really need a guitar tab book. You could just pick up the chords quite easily from the recordings, and that's really what taught me songwriting. Was like, oh, okay, So these chords, and then you have a verse, and then you have a chorus, and then you can just repeat that, and you can put it in different combinations with a solo in the middle, or and it was basically as simple as that. And I haven't really I haven't really progressed since then. I've just plowed that same furrow. So I hesitate to say I haven't really developed beyond that, but maybe I have.
It's funny because I had a similar start in with the guitar bands because I was into well, not similar. I was into pop. I got into all the real cheesy stuff, which now I think is brilliant. Hugh Lewis in the News, Paula Abdul, Michael Bolton, Bobby
I saw
Brown.
Janet Jackson. I saw Janet Jackson on the Black Cat tour and at Wembley Arena. Anyway,
but then something happened. I migrated to thrash metal, and then my first ever gig was the Almighty Wild Hearts and Curb Dog.
Wow.
And then I went. My second gig was Pantera Megadeth on the Countdown to Extinction tour, and I think I went to see Megadeth, no, Metallica at Milton Keynes. So I got well into thrash. It's weird, isn't it? How you go from one, all of a sudden you wake up in the morning and think I'm going to be a thrash metaler.
Well, my sort of counterpoint to that is I think my first gig when I was 15 was really Tanita Tikaram at the Hammersmith Odeon, okay, and who I subsequently met actually, and tried to write some songs with down the line. But anyway, that's another tale that is an hour in the telling. But that same year when I was 15, I tell everyone my proper first gig was Rage Against the Machine at Brixton, and they played with Tool and Wool. And that was really my first proper gig because, it was like a proper rock gig. The Tanita Tikaram one was just sort of sat down watching this sort of lounge jazz type 80s thing. Although it wasn't 80s, it would have been 1990. But anyway, so I totally get that moving about. And the other thing I haven't mentioned, which I have to mention, is unfortunately for some people, but it is the Doors. The Doors was when I was 15 and I discovered the Doors. That was a massive, huge thing for me. And that was actually alongside my discovery of Tori Amos. People are probably hanging their heads in their hands and switching off this podcast now. But I don't mind. I don't think Ross, the singer of Symposium, I don't think he'll mind me saying that he is also as huge a Doors and Tori Amos nut as I am, if not more so. But we both just see something in those artists we love.
Yeah, definitely. In terms of like the bass, did you was there a punch up for the guitar rolls then, or was it in Symposium?
What happened in Symposium was they were already a band, and I think they did have a physical punch up with their bassist at the time, and he threw him out, or he never wanted to go back. So they had a big gaping bass hole in their lineup, and it just made sense for me to pick up the bass. And I had a bass, and I didn't mind stepping in and playing the bass, but it was never my intention ever in my life to play the bass in a band. The only reason I got one was so that I could put it down on the Nirvana type recordings I was making at home on my little 4-track. But I thought, yeah, this is fun and it's simple, so it means I can jump around more and headbang more because there's less strings on it and less to go wrong. So I will just play the bass, and that was sort of the ethos that kind of defined Symposium for a time.
You were already writing songs then prior to sort of getting involved with the band.
Yeah, I think that's why they asked me to come and play bass, because they knew, because I've been circulating demo tapes of mine at the school, at the secondary school we were all in together. So my reputation sort of preceded me a little bit, and they knew I was you're that guy who does these tapes of his own songs. And I think they had half an eye on looking to do some of them. So before long, we were I was just teaching them all my originals, because they were just covering as I say, Green Day, Nirvana, and Offspring, and all of these bands, they were covering them, and it was great. And but we wanted to do our own originals too, so we had some ready-made ones there, and then we went from there.
So what was your demo tapes then? What kind of genre was that? You said sort of Nirvana-y, sort of grungy, angsty sort of stuff.
Yeah, so a lot of those Symposium songs were already written before I joined Symposium. So I think I taught them things like Bury You and Farewell to Twilight. I think they were already, so it was of that ilk. It was of the sort of indie punk ilk. And I think the first one we wrote as a band, more or less, was Drink the Sunshine, where Will had come up with this little riff and I wrote a song around it. And then Fair Weather Friend I wrote for them in a very much a skate punk vein, because I knew that was their kind of thing that they liked. Yeah, so it was that kind of stuff, really.
When you started to sort of get a kind of portfolio of songs together, I don't know why I call it portfolio.
An album. That's the traditional term.
When you started to get an album of songs, did you start touring like in a conventional way? Were you doing gigs? Touring, but gigging. Sorry.
No, we did 1994. We did 2 gigs, which were just at community centres in Hammersmith, where we were all from and went to school, just for our friends. And I think we charged them £2 to get in. And then to have a sort of a bucket of £200 at the end of the night seemed really exciting. I remember that. But then I made these tapes, demo tapes, classic demo tapes, and sent out about 50 envelopes to 50 venues around London, who were, all of the classic ones. I think the first one that responded was the Rock Garden in Covent Garden. Do you remember that place?
I don't remember that one.
It's no longer there, predictably. And then we got, loads of others, like the Roby in Finsbury Park, and loads in Camden, like the Falcon, the Monarch, all of these old places, the Brixton, Windmill, and other places. So 1995 was spent practically every weekend. We were going to a different pub, venue, club type place that would have us playing, and we sort of cut our teeth around London at these places. And either Will's dad would drive, or Hagop's dad, or my dad, and would drive us there and pick us up with all our gear. And it was that kind of thing, really.
And so that stage presence that you had, because I mean, one of the things that always stands out about Symposium was the energy and the stage presence and what you brought to live music. Really, was that developed then over a period of time, or were you all like that straight out the gate?
Straight out of the gate. I remember the very first rehearsal, and we've got some photographs. A friend of mine was there taking pictures just for fun, because he wanted to be a photographer. And the rehearsals would end up with us in a pile of equipment and mangled instruments and stuff. We were just full of energy and excitement, and we just had this restlessness about us. And just so much energy to expel. Don't know where it came from, or whether it was just love of music and being alive, or whether it's because we were in a very strict Catholic school and some of us had very strict parenting backgrounds or something, but we just needed to get this out. And just a love of loudness and thrashing around, and it's just pretty classic and pretty cliched in a way, but quite beautiful in another way. And so it was just we couldn't help it, and we just could not help it. Even when Symposium properly started, and I remember thinking, I don't have to do this. I don't have to go ballistic. But as soon as the first chord would crash in, I just couldn't help it. It was like it was really like being possessed by something. It's the closest I've come to it.
Do you think that helped in terms of just developing a fan base?
I think it. I think it did, because what was helpful was I quit school and Will quit school. Ross went to a different college, and we had lots of different groups of friends who would all congregate and come to the shows, basically. So we sort of had a ready-made audience of like 100, and then they would tell their friends, and then there'd be 200, and it was very much as you can get a grassroots kind of spread, mouth of word spread. That's how it seemed and came about, and they would go nuts as well. But I don't remember that really affecting me that much. It didn't really drive me, because even when the gigs were empty and we played to Two Man and a Dog, and we actually did that much later on across America as well, like played in bars to Two Man and a Dog, and it didn't, if anything, we were even more crazy and energetic on stage and spontaneous. You know, we never calmed down. I think the larger the audience, the calmer we became,
Yeah.
paradoxically.
And so when did you start to kind of get record company interest? And was that soon after that you started to sort of get this live following?
Yeah, I mean, it's so crazy to think back now, but at the end of 1995, I was completely disillusioned, and I thought, hang on, we've put everything into this. We've been playing for a year. That's it. It's never going to happen. And I just had no idea about, tenacity and longevity and how long these things take for people and how much work you have to actually put into them. But it actually happened pretty quick for us, really, considering, alarmingly quickly. So in beginning of, I think at the end of 95, the next door neighbor of Hagop, our guitarist, his next door neighbor just offered to manage us because he liked what he saw, because Hagop asked him along to a gig. He became our manager. He had contacts, and he was very able to exploit those contacts and exploit things in the music industry. So he was basically fomenting a kind of rabid bidding war between record labels and other and agents and all sorts of people. So he would put on a gig, make sure it was rammed with rabid fans, bring all these record company people along, and just do the classic thing, which I'm sure you can imagine, and just make it good and appealing and exciting, and feel like they had to have a part of this. And it was at that point in the music industry where I think people still had lots of money and were waving checkbooks around and doing huge amounts of cocaine and all other manner of things. And so yeah, that happened. But in the end, we went with the antithesis of all of that, which was Corder Marshall's Infectious Records, which was a small, honest label filled with integrity and love for the artists rather than love of money. And thank God for that, really. Yeah, and that was when we signed with them in the middle of 1996. Yeah, and I was doing lots of drama stuff at the time in West London, and I had to make a choice whether to go on tour with Symposium and make a proper go of it, or do the play I was supposed to be doing. But I chose Symposium, and the play had to go on without me.
Would you remember the first kind of studio sessions then that you had? Because obviously that would have been the next sort of stop.
Hugely. Yeah, massively.
What were they like?
They were amazing. The very first one was with a producer called Clive Martin, and we went to Rockfield Studios in Monmouth, which are quite legendary now. In fact, I think they recently had their own little BBC4 documentary, because I think they closed down. And that Rockfield was where Oasis recorded, Ash recorded their debut, Oasis recorded their debut, I believe, or if not their debut, certainly the one after that. And probably most famously, Queen recorded A Night at the Opera Bohemian Rhapsody in there on that piano in there. And when we went in there, the Stone Roses had just finished the Second Coming album, which had taken them 5 years or so. So I think the engineer there, a guy called Nick Brine, he was very pleased to have a different band in there for a change. Until he heard us play, and then he wished the Stone Roses had been back. No, but yeah, it was incredible. You know, there's sheep and cows, and we stayed over there. We do sheep and cows in the fields nearby, and at the window in the mornings. And one rock and roll story I do remember was because we got looked after very well. So there would be a communal kitchen, and they just ask us what we want for breakfast, for dinner. They just go and get it and make it for us. I mean, it was just living the dream, basically. When I look back at it now, that's essentially what it was, even though I didn't realize it at the time. But I do remember one night things got slightly out of hand, maybe after a lengthy trip to Monmouth Town, to one of the pubs there, and came back and carried on drinking. And we each had these separate rooms, separate bedrooms, which were all around the central kind of living quarters where we were staying, which is done really communally and lovely, you know, big fireplace and sofas and everything, and all our rooms were just off it. And I just remember hearing this massive commotion in the communal area as I was sort of settling in to go to bed, and I just gingerly opened my door and poked my nose around the corner, and someone, naming no names, had obviously set off one of those powder fire extinguishers.
Okay.
And everything seemed to be covered in this fine white powder, but like everything, sofas and furnishings, and so I just gently closed the door and pretended I hadn't seen it and went to sleep. And the next morning, and I woke up and dreading what I was going to find, and I opened it, and it was immaculately clean. And the cleaners had already been in and got it all out. And I think the sort of lesson was, you know, you think you're rock and roll, but we've seen far worse than this, and this doesn't faze us at all. And after that, we didn't even try. So, that's good.
Rock and roll cleaners.
Yeah, they sent for the rock and roll cleaners that day.
The album did well, didn't it? I mean, in terms of coming out, you did a good tour, and you did some good supports and some pretty decent TV stuff as well. I mean, do you remember, like, you know, feeling that this was happening, sort of thing? Did you all kind of collectively look at each other and go, this is kind of the dream is coming to fruition?
I think the overwhelming feeling, I think, if I'm being honest, was one of just like thinking how of ludicrousness and how ridiculous everything was. And it's crazy that we're doing that. You know, there's the sort of, you know, the story of going from playing at the Dublin Castle to the next week after being signed, supporting the Red Hot Chili Peppers at Wembley Arena, who were heroes of mine. And I remember EMF, and I mentioned to you EMF earlier, who we were listening to alongside Red Hot Chili Peppers, me and my friends. And they were in attendance too, and things like that. And having Chad Smith watch us from the side of the stage, and then eventually going on and playing with Metallica, playing with Foo Fighters on the Colour and the Shape tour, and things like that. You know, and that was, I think Dave Grohl was the real pinch yourself moment for me. Having, you know, as I talked to you about Nirvana, and having him being a really lovely person and very warm and welcoming, and joining in with things and watching us. And you know, there wasn't a sense of being welcomed into a rock and roll fraternity or something like that, or, you know, heavy metal kudos. There was a bit of that feeling at the Kerrang Awards every time. And because there were always these massive legends at the Kerrang Awards, like Lemmy or you know, Ozzy, or so something as ludicrous as that. You know, you just don't get any more legendary than those people who turn up, and you're thinking, well, we're kind of, are we actually a minor part of this? But then, you have the imposter syndrome as well, and you think, we've just blagged our way in here. We're not really heavy metal legends or going to be.
Were you feeling the pressure as well, in terms of being, because you touched on imposter syndrome and things like that, but obviously you were doing well, and you were asked to play support slots and touring and things like that. But with the pressure on such young sort of artists, what was that like for you? Or did you feel it at all?
Yeah, possibly. I know Ross said that to me recently, actually. He said the pressure must have been massive on you to write the songs, because everyone else, I know Will was writing songs and Ross was writing songs out of the love of it and the joy of it, I think, and just wanting to do it and needing to do it. Well, I think I did feel I need to write, if not hits exactly, then something quite commercial and catchy to keep the ship afloat, to keep interest going, to keep, I think I did kind of feel that a bit. But I mean, we were going for such a short time before it all ended at the end of 1999 that I don't think the pressure had enough time to really properly build up. And plus, I was very prolific anyway. I was writing about 50 to 100 songs a year anyway. That's just what I would do. Sometimes very quickly, sometimes like 5 songs in a day. And I don't know whether that was just because it was a bit of a sort of a meat grinder, sausage making operation, and I just felt like I had to bang them out. But or whether it's because I think I just loved it, and also there was definitely a part of me that loved it, and also one of my heroes was Prince, and I always admired and looked up to that kind of just do it, just get it all out there, and just throw everything against the wall and see what sticks, sort of thing.
Lyrically, though, in songs, where are you coming? What are you drawing on? What are your sort of main inspirations for the sort of song?
What content? Now or
well, I mean, I guess it would be interesting to see what the changes have been over the years.
If there have been any changes at all. Because like when I released my solo debut album, I think around about 2008, and I thought it was some sort of progression, and it was somehow more mature or sober or just better somehow. But I'm not sure it is now. It's actually, I can really see similarities to Symposium and everything, and maybe that's not surprising at all. But I am actually surprised when I listen to the Symposium stuff now, at how well it kind of holds up. And I'm not sure I was proud of it then or cared at all. I think I do remember desperately caring what other people thought of it. And now I don't. But I do see, and I have seen over the intervening years, that music and those recorded works of Symposium really are of value to a lot of people, or even if it's just to a small amount of people. They're of real value. And I think I looked at it very cheaply for a long time. And I don't know why that is. And I haven't really figured it out yet, whether it's just sort of a passing of time or nostalgia, or maybe just going insane in my old age. I don't know. But it's nice. It's nice. And obviously it had value to people back then, but I just didn't see it. So
is it potentially because you're caught up in it? It's you're in the eye of the storm, aren't you? Essentially, with that sort of thing. And then
I think that it is one of my main memories of that time. Is what a maelstrom it was. So many competing emotional things swirling around and going through my head, and I think everyone's, and really intense without wanting to make it sound traumatic or anything like that. It was just a very intense time of everything, because your dreams are invested in it, and your relationships with people, with your bandmates, and everyone's families and their relationship with that back home, and then everyone got girlfriends, and then that entered the picture, and then our manager and ourselves, just the relationship that people had with themselves and their own ambitions and perceived failures or successes, or it was just, and our youth, as you say, our youth at the time, it just made it all very, very difficult. Plus drinking, but sometimes it wasn't difficult. Sometimes it was just easy and fun and very flowing, and it was it was that cliched roller coaster from that point of the going up and down in terms of ease and difficultness and all of that sort of stuff. But I think we all, actually, I don't know, I can't speak for everyone, but but yeah, I think generally people look back on it with rose-tinted spectacles now, which rather than any kind of rancor or bitterness, I think.
Was it a decision to sort of split together, or what was the, if you don't mind
Yeah,
saying?
I think for many different reasons, it sort of fractured in 1999. There was kind of maybe perceived we didn't get the success that we wanted, which is a crazy thing to say because it was such a short space of time, and also other people did and do perceive that we had great success at that time. And so it's crazy to say that, but we just didn't, we wanted to be number one all the time, everywhere, and if we weren't, we just saw that as a failure, and so that was playing a part. And then there was just lots of behind the scenes things. In the end, I think it was just a kind of a natural ending. I think that people just wanted to go on and do different things or just be happier. And Hagop went to uni and just wanted to do that. And I think also it was pressure from parents, because we were still young enough to have that pressure from parents saying, come on, this isn't doing what you wanted it to do. So just get an education and get a proper job and forget about this head in the clouds thing. And I think that was coming at us from different quarters still. Between Symposium ending and my debut album was a kind of wildernessy hodgepodge of things which maybe weren't, just didn't come to fruition. And it was still fun in a way, but lots of mistakes there and wastes of time.
Where are you now then in terms of songwriting and projects? What are you up to?
I've still been writing. There is a second album out there called Pagan Leader, and I'm working on a third one of those. And I've got a few things. I'm trying to write for other people a bit, trying to do film scores and all of those kind of cliched things maybe. But I'm also trying to write some Christmas songs for Bjorn again in an ABBA style. There might be something with Symposium happening. There might not. There might not. So I'll, I'm going to say no further about that. If there was going to be something with Symposium happening, I would be very excited. Oh. And there might be. But I can say no more. Ah.
That was going to be my last question. Essentially, would you ever do anything together? Has there ever been any talk of coming back and doing some shows, or have you been asked? I mean, have there been conversations over the years?
I think the ice, if you like, is thawing, and we did all meet up for a curry in Hammersmith when we were allowed to, just out of lockdown. And I think lockdown sort of come full circle in this discussion, but I think, lockdown did make people reassess and think about things more. People had more time spent in their own heads, didn't they, than before at home, for better or worse. But I think in the case of Symposium and Symposium members, it seemed to be for the better. And it was lovely meeting up and recognizing that we were all married and we all had children and were having the same happiness and joy and difficulties with that sort of situation. The sort of not terrible difficulties, but just getting up at Christ o'clock and having unreasonable toddlers being unreasonable, which is just par for the course, isn't it? Yeah, I just think where it was never on the cards before, it just seems to be. I think it is a lot to do with the passage of time, and that mellows people and makes people have gratitude for what there was, and people become more forgiving about the way we might have been back there, or if individuals acted not brilliantly, to be forgiving about that and understanding about that and recognize why. And I've encountered that a lot with different people I've met from that era, from different bands we've played with, and obviously I don't want to name too many names right now, but I can tell you afterwards but who they are. But a lot of people think they didn't act brilliantly in those times, and who can blame them? And I certainly don't blame any of them. And it's very fascinating to me, the sort of rock and roll world. I watched Rocket Man with my wife the other night.
Yeah, that's good.
What a middle-aged thing to say, but yeah, we watched it, and it just strikes me, that whole rock and roll era with all those classic bands from Led Zeppelin to Queen and all of those, and what happened and the way it was, the whole Spinal Tap mentality, that was really of an era. And I think it's sort of over now. I don't think that necessarily exists. I sort of see it sometimes. I catch glimpses of it still when I'm touring, but I think it's by accident rather than design, and it's done very tongue-in-cheek. It's still rock and roll to headline Wembley Stadium, is rock and roll, but
not necessarily rock and roll to sort of set a fire extinguisher off in a hotel room or wherever now, or throw a TV out the window.
No, or smashing instruments up on stage. Do people do that still? Have you seen anyone do that recently? Not recently.
I'm sure they do, but it seems such a waste. There's so many people out there that would love a new guitar. That's always how I see it. Just give it to somebody in the audience. Don't do that. I don't understand that.
Yeah. In fact, that is what Dave Navarro did on the gig that we supported, Red Hot Chili Peppers. I remember him just handing out his guitar at the end to the crowd. But then I actually think the crowd, like a bunch of zombies or banshees, they actually sort of tore the guitar apart. I think they broke into pieces among themselves and handed it out. So no one person got it anyway. But so I remember Reading 98 when we really went to town on smashing everything up on stage, and got quite heavily criticized by some people for doing that. But I'm pretty sure Green Day just put all their stuff in a massive pile and set light to it at the end of the set. And I thought, well, how can you ever go at us? But it's probably because we hadn't sold millions and billions of records like Green Day. But but I do remember, people were really down on the smashing stuff up for a while. But I think the only reason I did it was because Nirvana did it. And I thought it was cool.
It wasn't like it was not a trope of a band, of that kind of the music you were making and the presence and what you were doing. It's not like anyone would expect you not to do it. So I wouldn't, worry too
But then
much.
but in 99 and the gigs we did then, and when we went back to Reading 99, and I remember really being really conscious of it and
Mm,
really wanting to buck the trend and just really turning around, having every fiber of my being wanting to smash the shit out of everything on stage, but just gently placing my bass guitar, my immaculately looked after bass guitar into its guitar holder and gently putting the little protector over it and leaving the stage, just very calmly after a ludicrously high energy performance. I really made a point. That was my thing in the last year, of really just treating the instrument with utmost respect,
mm,
because we had people whose job it was to look after those instruments for us. And I realized, aside from anything else, it's massively disrespectful to them, who just spent ages polishing it and restringing it and making it sound as beautiful as possible.
yeah.
Even though they didn't actually mind, because I spoke to them about it and they said, that's just our job and it's your job to smash it up or not, as you like.
Yeah, yeah.
But I just want to say just one last thing on smashing instruments up.
Yes.
I wasn't aware of the Who until sort of after Symposium, really. But the Who smashing stuff up, in particular Pete Townsend, it was an art form, and I think it was performance art, and it definitely wasn't that with Symposium for me. But I can appreciate what the Who did.
Yeah, yeah.
That's all I will say.
Well,
The end. Thank you for allowing me to say it.
Thank you, Wojtek, for coming on. I really appreciated your time this evening. It's been great to hear about Symposium and everything else that you've been doing, and just your thoughts on everything after all this time, and really look forward to hearing any news that you might have coming up.
Well, thank you very much. I would love to come back if and when such time as I have any Symposium related things to offer up to you. I would love you to be the first to hear them.
Thank you. Well, I'll have you on for a news update, a bonus episode.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Thanks so much, Wojtek.
You're more than welcome. Take care. Bye.
Thanks again to Wojtek for joining me on this episode. It was a really good conversation. I will put links to Wojtek's music and his website and things like that in the show notes to this episode, so that you can have a listen to the stuff that he's been up to since Symposium. So here we go with all the boring information as to how you can support the podcast if you're still listening. You can follow me on social media, Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. Just search for Back to Britpop. If you'd like to give some financial support, I have a virtual tip jar, buy me a coffee type thing, and the link to that is in the show notes as well. And if you haven't rated or reviewed the podcast, it would be fantastic if you could do that. That's it again for this episode. Thanks again for listening. Thanks for all your support. I'll be back when I'm back. As I said, it's going to be quite tricky, so let me know who you'd like me to speak to, and I'll do my best to hunt those people down. So, see you soon.